No offence intended. You know, the Sihar's basically behind the nave, so okay.
What you think about when you're born into a fire? Let 'em burn it out. Sell 'em to the
That face that is usually covered by her phone. That face that is usually covered by her phone has finally made an appearance. That face is laughing. That face is expressive. That face is talking more than one.
Hello, and welcome to Introduction to Painting, Intro to Painting for short. My name is Graham Dane. I'm a British artist based in Alaska, and I've been asked to run these classes, which I'm very happy to do. Painting is a fantastic activity. It's something I've done for the last 35, 40 years. And when you think about making art, it's an ancient activity. It goes right back to Paleolithic times when people would lose their deposits by painting on their cave walls. And those images still exist. And so as an activity, I think it's central to who we are as a species. And the other thing is, it's one of those activities where you produce something from nothing. It's very creative. And it's possible to produce something that can move people to tears or anger. And so it's a tremendous activity, and I think that it's central to who we are. Painting is it's meditational, it's frustrating, it can be angering, it's not necessarily easy, but it's a very mechanical activity, and that really means the more of it you do, the easier it becomes. And the other thing to remember is that if this is your first time picking up a brush, everybody starts there. It doesn't matter whether you're Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, everybody starts at the point where they've never painted before, and then it's just a steady process of building up your skills. And hopefully, we've got 8 weeks, 8 lessons to help with that. Now, while we're doing these classes online, if you are following, you are welcome to send me a message, and you're welcome to send me images for comment or for advice. And if you're on this, you must be on Facebook. So you're welcome to either send me a Facebook friend request, or you're welcome to send me messages via Facebook. It's Graham Dane, GrahamDane. And the other thing I'll mention if you're on Facebook is there's a community page for painting that I set up with some friends several years ago, and it's called Painters Talking Painting. If you are interested in the subject and you want to take it further, there's a lot of articles, there are interviews with painters and sort of issues related to this. There's a lot of art history. And more importantly, it's a great resource because we post albums of artists' images. And I think we have about 1,200 albums, and they're everything from extreme realism, almost photographic realism, to single colors, and everything in between. And so one of the things I like about this subject is that it's all-inclusive. You can produce any style. It doesn't matter what your skill level is. Everybody can paint, and everybody can be taught to draw and to paint. We're putting some kits together for you, and I've got one of them here, and we'll start by going through some of the things. In some ways, most important thing are these, your paints. They're Liquitex. They're good paints. They have a lot of color in them. And there's no right way or wrong way of using them. All I can do is I can share the ways that have worked for me. And when it comes to acrylic, it's very different from oil. We've all seen, I suppose, films or images of artists, and they've got the big palette with all the colors around it. They put their brushes in between. You can do that with oil paint because it dries slowly. But with acrylic, you can't. If you do that, it looks fantastic, but within half an hour, those paints will be unusable. And so we're going to give you, they're just simple binders. And they've just got some white paper, and these will work as palettes. If you've got a plate somewhere else, that will work as well. Liquitex, acrylic in general, is water-based. And so water. I keep 2 sets by for this. One is for washing brushes, and one is for adding to the paint. Because, Excuse me, I think something on my phone has just gone off. Let me just turn it off. I apologize for that. It's telling me it's the top result for some reason. I often have this problem when it comes to technology. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Anyway, I keep them separate because if you've got dirty water and you add it to your paint, it will affect the color. Okay, so where should we start? Let's start with brushes. Loosely, you've got two types. I'll get larger ones to show you. These are called rounds, and these are called flats. There are different sizes, and these are just two types of brushes. There are actually 7, but both of them have a different job. If you're a carpenter or you're a chef, you'll have God knows how many different types of knives or different types of screwdrivers or chisels, and they all have a different function. They're all used differently. Brushes are going to be the same. And be kind to your brushes. I abuse mine terribly, but keeping your brushes in order and keeping them clean makes a difference. If you forget to wash a brush out, if you dip it in paint and leave it, when that paint dries, you cannot reuse the brush. Now with oil paint, you can clean it afterwards, but with acrylic, effectively, acrylic's basically plastic. I mean, it's obviously more than this, but once it dries, that's it. Your brush is gone forever. Brushes, if you get really into this, there are a couple of places in town that I can suggest if you live in Anchorage to go and buy materials. One is Michael's. They have some pretty decent, reasonably inexpensive brush sets, which you might want to supplement your supplies with. But we do have one art shop in town, and that's Blaine's. And brushes can be really expensive. I once was in London and I looked at a paintbrush and I asked the person how much. It was a beautiful handmade paintbrush. It's Japanese. And I said, how much is that? And the person, without blinking, said, and it would be the equivalent, I said, oh, it's about $900. And if I spent $900 on a brush, I think I'd be too scared to actually use it. So, brushes. Two sorts. When it comes to mixing, there are better ways to mix than others. And the other thing, don't worry about making mistakes. The wonderful thing about paint is it's what I would describe as it's a very forgiving medium. And what I mean by that is it will dry reasonably quickly. If you don't like what you've done, let it dry, and then you can just paint over the top and cover it up. And I always used to, when I was an elementary art school teacher, and I'm a university teacher now, I still use the same thing. I would tell my students, artists never make mistakes, they merely change their minds. Yes, we know that's a crock, but it does make it sound so much better. So, the paints themselves. We're not going to be dealing too much with color today. We'll predominantly be working with black and white, but color is a big part of this. I mean, I just brought one quick canvas in. That's a pet portrait, and color is one of those things I think that affects people tremendously. We all have favorite colors. We all dress in certain colors, and there's a lot of information out there on the psychology of colors. It's something that I find very interesting, and with some of the stuff that we talk about, I will put some handouts together, and those handouts will be available to you if you would like to contact. Is it the Arts Council? ASCA, the Alaska State Council on the Arts, and they will send those handouts to you. I'll also mention artists, and I may even show you some images of their work during this. And likewise, the website that this is attached to, Charles, who's running the website, I'll send him those images of those from those artists with details. And you can always look at them as well. It's the first class, and I'm a little bit disorganized, so I apologize for that. But in future, before classes, those images will be available for you to look at so that you can scan through them and you can see who I'm talking about and the image that I'm discussing as we're working. Right. Well, I suppose, what other things? Yes, your kit. Within your kit, we've also included a small sketchbook and some pencils. I'm a huge fan of drawing. In fact, I teach drawing at the university. And drawing is a really focusing experience. If you can draw something, I genuinely believe you can paint it. And so one way of working, I'll suggest, if it works for you, fantastic. If it doesn't, you can find another one, is that while you're painting, if you have a sketchbook out, if you get to a spot in your painting and you're not sure about, draw it, sketch it, and where you find your imagery from is multitudinous. You can draw from life, you can paint from life, you can paint from photographs, you can paint from your imagination. And they are the three sources for all art: observation, imagination, and I can't remember the last one, but basically they have to be. So, a few other details. A canvas. If it's square, that's one thing. If it's a rectangle, this is what we would call landscape format. That's portrait format. Okay? Landscape, portrait. Generally, people are painted this way. Landscapes are painted crossways, but they don't have to be. And that choice is one of the first choices that you're going to make. Now, very kindly, my other half is also a painter, Linda Infante-Lyons, and she's helped me set this up. And God bless her, she's put a lot of notes together from some of her previous classes. So I will use some of those. So thank you, Linda. And the first question I guess you have to ask is what to paint? And that's pretty fundamental. You can paint the same thing over and over again. You can paint something different every time. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. There are some artists who have effectively painted the same image for 50 years. It changes each time. There are other artists whose style varies radically, and they have a great deal of change. And again, that's okay too. If you put 50 artists in the same room and you ask 50 artists to say what good painting is, they'll all probably come up with different answers. Now, they'll all be right. They'll all consider the others to be wrong, but that's one of the beauties of this particular subject. With very few cases, there are no wrong answers. There are some disastrous paint combinations, and you can't mix acrylic with oil paint. And so there are some technical no-nos, but when it comes to subject matter, that's pretty much up to you. And the great thing about the internet is that you have access quite literally to tens of millions of images. You may have photographs of yourself or your family or friends. And so any source material works. So let's start, I suppose, with first decision is this. If you're going to paint a landscape, and I'm just going to do a tonal study of a landscape today. Tone is the posh word for lights and darks. Value scale is another one. Now we're going to use black and white. Color also has a value. And if you want to see it, if you are wearing glasses, take them off. Literally look at an image and squint. And when you squint at it, you stop seeing the detail and you see it more in terms of lights and darks. If we are going to do a landscape, I'm just going to read from my notes very quickly. Don't try and copy everything. There's so much detail out there, you cannot physically paint every pine needle and every leaf. And if you try, and if you would like to do it, please don't let me stop you. But it will be frustrating. If frustration is what gets you off, fantastic. Please do that. But painting can be, as I said earlier, a very frustrating experience. Think back to the first time you got behind the wheel of a car. And think how many years you've been driving and think how easy it now is. Well, maybe it's not a great analogy, but I guess it's a fairly reasonable one. As I said earlier, the more of this you do, the easier it will become. So, let's start with a landscape. And I've got a couple of images here which I'm going to work from. First of all, where's your horizon going to be? Now, 2 questions. I'm going to be working on reasonably small canvases while I'm here because they're easy to complete or at least get done. But normally, you don't have to restrict your size. We're going to give you some large sheets of watercolor paper that are fantastic to work on, and we're going to give you some small canvases as well, so you get to choose the 2. You can paint on old timber. I've had friends who've painted on road signs. I've had friends who've painted on tarpaulins, on cardboard, on wood. If it's a flat surface and it will take paint, you can paint on it. Traditionally, artists have used canvas and paper. But if you're going to paint on your walls, get permission from whoever owns them. But otherwise, you can pretty much produce art on anything. And I've even seen people painting on other people. Not that I'd encourage that either, but it's a case of you'll find the materials that you enjoy doing, and eventually you'll find the subject matter that really appeals to you. And that might take some time. And let's be honest, I look back at some of my older work and think, oh, good grief, did I really paint that? Pluck out my eyes. We all have those moments. And then there are other times when I look back at work, and to quote another English painter, Howard Hodgkin, he said, sometimes I look at my old work and think, how in God's name did I do that? I have no idea. He also said, sometimes when I finish a painting, it's as much of a surprise to me as it is to everybody else. He died recently, and he was painting for some 60 years. And so I've been painting for 35, going on 40 years. And I would not claim to be an expert. I'm still learning new things. And when I'm teaching my students, they're also teaching me new things. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's a truism in this case. And so complacency is the death of creativity. So let's start. These are just a couple of very quick illustrations. And we're going to look at a landscape. Now, when you are deciding where you're going to put your horizon, you have 2 choices. Well, you have choices in it. Do you want to put it low down, middle, or high? If you put it low down, you'll have a lot more sky, which means you might like painting clouds. You might want to paint some kind of fabulous atmospherics, and that might be the focus of the painting. If you place your horizon higher up, then you're going to have more of the emphasis on the landscape. A low horizon line gives you a sense of space and depth. It's much larger in scale, even if it's small. Whereas a higher horizon line, you're going to feel more as if you're in the landscape because it's a little more intimate. If you want a high horizon line, that's probably a better choice. And I think that we'll start with this. I have a couple of images here, and they're of a landscape. Hopefully we can see that well. Okay. Now, I've chosen this on purpose with Linda's help because it is a very simple image. But we're not interested in color. Today, we are literally something very similar, going to do something in black and white. And I think that's a pretty good start. I think color is something we'll ease into next week. It can be a little slippery. But let's get working now. Okay, so basic setup. I've got something to mix on, and they're also very useful. Shop rags, towel rags, whichever. You can use old T-shirts. You can also see that I often use my clothes. It's useful because it means that you can clean off something if you're unhappy with it, or if you've got too much paint on the brush. Plus, once you've washed the brush out, it's wet. That will affect your paint. So you can actually use these to also remove the excess. Paint, when it comes straight out of the tube, we'll see, as opposed to when it's actually got a lot of water in, is very different. So, if we're going to use gray, we have to start with 3 colors. You have straight white. This is the color you've got the largest tube of because we tend to use more of white than anything else. And funnily enough, there are two blacks. As you get into painting and you get into color, when somebody says, I'd like that yellow car, you may find yourself saying, well, what kind of yellow is it? Because there's lemon yellow, there's Naples yellow, there's yellow ochre, there's cadmium yellow, there's Hansa yellow. Each one of these has a different property. And I'm not trying to be an art hole when I say that, which it's just one of those things. Color is fascinating. And the reason you have two blacks is very simple. One of them is a warm black, ivory black. It has a slightly orange quality when you thin it out. And then you have Mars black. And the same is true with Mars black. When you thin it out, it has a bluish quality. And as soon as you start talking about blues versus oranges, you're talking about warm versus cool colors. And depending upon what your palette's going to be, your color choice, your choice of black, if you're going to use it, will make a huge difference. And we'll use both of these together so that you can see them. But I won't mix them. I will just mix them with this. All right, so let's clear my space away. So I've got a little bit of... For the purposes of this, I'm going to work from this. There are many ways of starting. You can draw it in paint. I'm going to start by drawing it with pencil. I'm not used to working upright, so hopefully I'll just move it to here. I'm choosing a different shape because I've decided I'd like a lot more horizon. So, simple. Where's my horizon going to be? Probably about there. I'll start with my first plane. So my first shape is going to be fairly large, and I'm just going to draw it across. There's a second one that will come up behind it. And again, notice, very simple shapes. There's another one that comes through here. Another one that's going to come through here. I have yet another one that's going to go across here. Another that comes up through here. And I'm changing some of these. And generally, shapes are going to be larger. They'll have more detail in the foreground. Things will get grayer as they move away from you because you're looking through a lot more water vapor. And so it's almost like seeing through a mist. That's good enough. Now, just because I've drawn those lines in, I don't have to work within them. And that's something else that's really important. Just because you draw something up, don't let those lines constrain you. So we'll start, I'll choose a fairly large brush. Okay. It's always better to start with your lightest color and work forward. And it's very simple. If you start with white first, again, I'm not putting very much down. I think we'll start, I'm effectively going to do this. One side I'll use the ivory black, one side I use the Mars black, and you'll see the difference. So we'll start with the Mars black. Okay. I'm going to put just a very small amount down. Not very much at all. And the reason we start with our white is you add very small amounts, hardly anything, to the white and mix it in. And keep mixing. Notice, I haven't completely covered the brush, just what I need. And then I'll just on one side, just very quickly, put it in. Again, if it goes over the lines, doesn't matter. Now, I can then take a little bit more black, again, very small amount, mix it in with that, And already I can see the change. If you start with black and you add the white, you'll end up using so much of your white paint to actually get that light color. So it's always better to start light and work forwards. And the other thing is, if you run out of white, if you've got any white latex hanging around the house, you can mix those two things together. So you don't have to, say you're painting in the middle of the night, you run out of color, you don't have to sort of tear your hair out. Just go to your garage, find your pot, do the same job. So, mix it in. And again, put it down. I'm going to change that slightly as well. There's some very sort of ridgy brush marks there, so I'm just going to wave it up, fill it in. And it's okay to make changes as you're working. So my first two planes. Third one. Again, tiny bit of color. Just a small amount. And again, if you need to, you can refer back to this. And remember, a brush, there are many ways of using it. You can use a brush so it's on its long edge. You can use the tip to draw with, or you can use the flat edge to lay color down. You can always come back and get some more. And I think I'm going to add something here. I think I'm going to take that up there. So my first three layers. Almost out of black. So get a little bit more down. I started with Mars black, didn't I? So let's make sure I get Mars black again. Good. And what I'm going to do, because the paint's beginning to dry out very slightly, I am just going to put a touch of water, hardly anything on there. If you add too much water, and I will show you that as well. Okay, let's get a load of water on my brush. The paint's very different. It's much thinner. You've actually sort of thinned it out too much. And let's go really to town. If it's really thin, it will actually begin to run off if you're working upright. That's where these become really useful. Pinch them out. Dry them off. Now, that makes no difference to me. I'm also going to use that to get rid of the water from here, because I mentioned earlier, paint's a forgiving medium, and this is what I mean. Okay, so I'm getting a bit low on white. So I just put the paint down as I need to. I'm also a very messy painter. Years ago, I lived in a place that had white Berber carpets. And the amount of paint that got tracked in on those carpets, let's just say I became an expert at cleaning them, or at least hiding the damage anyway. All right, so I'm going to just dip. I am literally just dipping in the tip of the brush for a little extra water. That's not quite dark enough, so I'll just add a tiny bit more color to it. Again, loosely following the lines. Pick up more paint. There's a tendency sometimes where people will work and work and work and work and work, and they'll eventually run out of paint. It's there for a reason. Mix it as you need to. Now, as in this case, these planes are beginning to come a little nearer, the color's not going to be quite as solid. I might want it to be a little patchy because that might be reminiscent of, say, trees. Okay. So now we're getting to the last couple on this side. So again, always a small amount of paint. It's better to add and build up than try and work backwards. You can go through a bucket of paint in order to get back to where you were if you're not careful. So this one will be a little bit darker again. Small amounts of color, mixing it in. Scoop it up on the brush. I think I'm going to make that a little darker. I want it to stand out just a little bit more. And if you get the odd paint smear of black that's unmixed, you can always mix it in on the canvas itself. So again, I'm just going to get a tiny piece of water, just a very small amount of water, and work it in. There are different schools of thought. Some people will say it's better to have less paint on your brush than too much. Others will say scoop it up and slap it down. I would always try and keep your paint from going into this part. This is called the feral. Great name, because of course feral animals are wild. I've always thought that was rather appropriate for many artists I know. But it means, one, you can keep your brushes cleaner, but two, once the paint gets into the bottom, the brush begins to clog up and it's not as easy to work. So I've got two more colors, two more tones. Tones and values are the same thing, interchangeable. So again, now I'm going to be lip mixing this one a little darker. And I can go quite dark with this one now. So again, a little bit more paint. So again, I've hardly used any paint so far. And this is good paint. I ordered this. Liquitex is a good company. These are excellent paints. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me just get this one down. See, that's not dark enough. It isn't defined clearly enough against the shape that's behind it. So I can just mix a little bit more in. I think I'll go a little bit darker again. Good, that's much better. So again, work it down, and I've got a kind of a line that will come up through here. And now I don't like that one very much, so I can change that. When I do that, it's not dark enough. So keep mixing. So you're constantly looking, adding, subtracting, and making those decisions. Painting is not really a passive activity. Okay. Again, I'll go a bit darker than that as well. That's better. Now I can see that edge. And just for the hell of it, because it's getting nearer, maybe I'll just start putting a few irregular shapes along the top, just to imply a little bit more detail. If it's not dark enough, just add a little bit more color, put it in. And now I'm down to the last section. So I will put a tiny bit of color on my brush, and now adding a bit more paint. I'm going to make this not black, but it's going to be the darkest value. In fact, I think I'll just start mixing the black in with it to make it darker. So notice, I haven't even cleaned my brush yet. I haven't needed to because I'm using black and white. If I was mixing between, moving between colors, obviously I would. That's still not dark enough. So broken shapes here. So again, you can dab the brush. I'll use a little more paint again. Oops. That's better. And if you need to, you can always mix on the canvas itself. So at the moment, I'm just adding straight ivory black. Dabbing the end. Keep working it through. Now I'm going to wash my brush. And as I said earlier, be kind to your brushes. They are your best friends in this. I mean, I'll show you other ways you can paint without brushes. But when you wash, all the way to the bottom. Now, some people will just dabbling it round in the center. Go right to the bottom so you can feel it. And you can tell if all the color is gone, because when you do that, okay, there's a little bit of black on there still. If you need to, you can use your fingers. You're welcome to use dish soap as well. Hot water is fantastic. But effectively, clean brush. And when you are using color, keeping your brushes clean makes a huge difference. If you are using yellow, and I'll give you a quick example, okay? A lovely yellow, okay? You have a dirty brush, and there's a tiny bit of black in there, and suddenly the yellow is killed. It's unfortunate. Okay, so I'll just wash it again. Okay, good. So I'm going to now use the Mars black. So hopefully we'll be able to see the real difference between one and the other. So I'll keep them separate. A little bit of white. Again, I usually squeeze from the end. I think it's my Puritan upbringing. I hate wasting materials. A little bit of black again. So again, always more white than I need. So we're going to start with the furthest color back. So pull a bit of color in. Touch. That's it. And it doesn't matter how much of this color you make, you can always use it for the later ones. So again, it's a bit light, so I can just add a tiny bit more to it. Okay, paint that in. Now, if you want to know how light or dark something is, you squint. It's kind of subtle, but you can see that there is a difference. Let me hold that closer to the camera. You can see there is a difference between those two grays. A cold color palette, so say you wanted to use predominantly blues, sort of reds that are more along the scale towards purple. A cold color palette can suggest a temperature. It can make you feel chilly. It might be less inviting. A warm palette, oranges, bright reds, we tend to think of those as joyous colors. And so the kind of colors you're using, I mean, for instance, that's predominantly yellow and orange. And so colors can be welcoming or not. And they can also help set a mood or not. And if that's going to be important to you, then color theory is something that I'll put some handouts together, or I'll suggest a couple of good websites that you can have a look at it. Okay, so on to the next one. Slightly darker than the one before. And canvas has a texture. So if you just do it very quickly, the texture will show. So if you're going to work and you want to get rid of that texture, you can work up and down, left to right, and it will help fill it in. Next plane. A little bit more. And the nice thing about mixing it all up on the same spot is you can see instantly whether it's as dark as you want it to be or it adds more. It's not like you're taking a piss, going elsewhere and trying to see. You can literally see what went on before and you can reuse that. So again, just go to the water bucket as opposed to the washing bucket. Just a tiny bit of water. Barely touch it. And then I should put that in. That's probably a little bit too dark. So again, just a very small amount to bring it back to where we want to be. So it needs to be distinctive, but at the same time, because it's further away distance-wise, it needs to be not as distinctive. Again, I'll change that angle very slightly there and there. Go back to a bit more. Now you can really begin to see just what the difference is between them. So again, always small amounts. Tiny bit more perhaps. And it's always better to start small, tiny amounts and build up. That's better. Okay. So that one can go in there. Change that angle slightly. Bring that in. And it doesn't matter if you produce more paint than you need, because that is going to be the basis for your next color. Okay, so we're going to jump a couple because we put those behind. So I'm going to make this a little bit larger. So again, bring everything in. You can always just swivel it around. Let's just get rid of a tiny bit of paint there. Okay, so let's see what that looks like compared to that. A little bit too light, so again, just add a little bit more. Tiny bit more again. And on something like this, as I say, you can just cover it up pretty quickly. And you can redo those areas like this. That will finish it straight down. So that's why I say it's a forgiving medium. It allows you to hide your mistakes, errors, whatever you want to call them. Okay, and so let's give that a bit more detail here. So again, don't want too much variation. So I can just keep mixing it on the until I'm happy. That's fine. I'm getting a little bit too much paint, so I'll just remove some. And now I'm down to my last color. So I just take a tiny bit, and now I'm mixing it on the black. I'm going to need a little bit more. Check I've got the right one. And the reason that your choice of black makes a difference is very simple. A lot of people will mix black to make their shadows and their darkest areas. Okay, so we'll just put some shapes in through here. So again, you can just tap with your brush. So again, I'm now using the edge of the brush. And you can always come back and tidy that up. Tiny bit of water again, hardly anything. And when they're very dark, it will become harder to see as they get darker. It's a little harder to see the differences between them. Tiny bit more water again. Okay, that's it. Not too much. The paint will go down more easily. So again, brush marks. You might want to see them. So for instance, that's a brush mark. If you don't want to see it, Just keep working it until it's gone. Very simple landscape. How are we doing for time, by the way? Okay. Now, great thing about I'll wash my brush out once more. So again, right to the bottom. When I'm in my studio, I tend to have a tap running, and I will actually work my brushes out, and I work them against my hand with a tiny bit of soap to actually remove any extra pigment. I'm terrible when it comes to brushes. I usually have a bucket of about 50 or 60 at the end of the day, and I've left some of them in the water for about 8 hours. Sometimes I leave the brushes in the water for a few days. Try not to do that. What will happen is the water will get underneath the ferrule into the wood will swell up, the ferrule splits, and the heads fall off. So it's, that's why we need to be kind. Again, still got color on there. Eventually, with time, that will cease being a white bristle, and it will eventually sort of take some color on. That happens with all brushes. It doesn't mean they're bad, but it does mean, again, when you are wiping them out, that's what you want to see, nothing. When it comes to the sky, I'm just going to use straight titanium white. And I'm actually going to mix a little bit of both to balance it up. Again, add a little bit more water, just a squitch, and then put it in. That's too dark. And that's what I mean by don't worry about making mistakes. It's gone. If you go over the edge, that doesn't matter either. You can always work that into the picture. And now I'm using almost pure titanium white. And when it comes to the top here, take a bit more. I'm going to get more painterly. And what I mean by that is I'm going to do a little bit more mixing on the canvas. I'm going to use far bigger strokes. Every so often I might dirty my brush up because I might want to give the impression of either clouds or some kind of atmospherics. So again, a little bit. I'm going to get a little more water this time. Mix it in. Go up to the edge. Clean that edge up. Again, never be afraid to make the changes. And I think that's one of the most important lessons that you can teach anybody when they are beginning. Right. Now, that's a fairly uniform landscape. Obviously, you can make things larger or smaller. You can have this, maybe it comes out. So again, this is just a really basic exercise. And if you keep your paint a little wetter for this stage, I can then do a little bit of extra mixing actually on the canvas itself. And the nice thing about brush marks, and all lines are directional. I'm always telling my drawing students that. If we see a straight line, we look at it and our eye follows it, in which case you can use brush marks to suggest a sense of movement and energy. So I'm not just keeping it just one color. You might put a tiny bit, hardly anything on. And if you do want to paint landscapes and clouds, are a thing, there are some great websites. There are some fantastic images of different types of clouds out there. Start downloading them. Let me just wash this out. Now, every so often, once your water starts getting gray, I would say throw it out, get some new stuff, because it will slowly affect your pain. We're coming to the end of the first session. And what I'm going to say is this. You have available to you literally tens of millions of images. Google image search, fantastic tool. You don't even need to go to the library and get books out these days. Although I do enjoy flipping through the pages still. If there's something you are interested in painting, Google image search it. See if other people have done it. And the other thing is, if you're interested in landscapes and you're interested in clouds, start looking for those images. And if there are images that you think, good grief, that's fantastic, download a copy and either print it off or start a file so that you can have images that either intrigue you or you think, I can use that later. So you start to build up your own kind of reference library for your work. Be careful. If you go on Google Images and you get too into it, you can click on one image, move to the next, and suddenly an hour's gone. But you have all this information available to you. It's, in some ways, easier to start working from photographs than it is to actually work from reality, because the lights and the darks, they're all set. They're all there for you. This is an image by Rockwell Kent, an American painter who did actually come up to the Arctic. And it was suggested by Linda, and I think it's a good example, and that is this. This is what Rockwell Kent painted. We've been talking about value and tone. So that was his image. But when you actually remove the color, you can clearly see how in the foreground you actually have more detail and more contrast, and that contrast begins to contract and get less as you get further away. Thank you for attending the first one. A very simple, straightforward class. They'll build up. They'll be a little bit more complex each week. We'll be adding more colors. We'll be using different brushes, different subject matters. If you're interested in these and would like a kit, please contact the Alaska State Council on the Arts. And as I say, as I talk about artists' work, if I mention artists' websites or if I mention movements in art, whatever, I will actually send images to the Arts Council so they can actually put them up on the Facebook page for this so that you can see them while we're talking about them. Anyway, thanks very much. And as they say in America, have a nice day.
Thank you.